The CEO's son waltzed into my company, stole the office I worked years to earn. And that day I realized one single email could destroy everything he thought he owned. Stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just another workplace drama. It's about betrayal, humiliation, and the moment I decided I wouldn't let privilege crush the years of sweat and sacrifice I poured into my career. If this story moves you, don't forget to support our channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and share it with people who know what it feels like to fight for respect. My name is Sarah, and I'm in my late 20s. I work as a project manager in a mid-sized marketing firm in Chicago. To some people, that might not sound like much, but for me it meant everything. I didn't get here by accident. I clawed my way up from the bottom, staying late when others clocked out, giving up vacations when I could have been with family, even packing up my life and moving away from the only hometown I'd ever known. I told myself it would be worth it, that hard work still mattered. My office became the symbol of that belief. It wasn't just four walls and a desk. It was proof. Proof that I mattered. Proof that the sleepless nights and broken promises to friends and family weren't in vain. Every time I shut the door behind me, I felt like I'd earned a piece of stability in a world that often ignored people like me. But here's the truth I didn't want to face. In the corporate world, merit doesn't always decide your future. Politics do. Family names do. And people like me, people who bleed themselves dry to climb step by step, can lose it all with one executive order. When I first heard whispers that the CEO's son was coming to the firm, I brushed it off. I thought, fine, let him join. I'd been here for years. I knew the ropes, knew the clients, knew the grind. I believed my work would outshine anything he brought to the table. But a part of me, deep down, feared the storm that was coming. And I was right to be afraid. Because soon enough, I would learn that my office, my reputation, and everything I thought I'd earned could be handed over to someone who hadn't lifted a finger. That was the moment my story began. The moment I stopped being silent and realized that sometimes the smartest form of revenge is not shouting, not fighting in public, but sending just one email at the perfect time. The first time I met Ethan, I knew exactly what kind of man he was going to be. He strolled into the office late on his very first day, wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and yet he carried himself like he was already running the place. People whispered his name in the hallway before he even reached the department. Ethan was the CEO's only son, fresh out of college, and apparently, this job had been created just for him. When my manager called me into his office and told me, "Sarah, you'll be showing Ethan the ropes," my stomach dropped. I wanted to protest, to say that I didn't have time to babysit some spoiled kid. But I bit my tongue. That's how things worked here. If the boss wanted his son to succeed, the rest of us were expected to make it happen. I nodded, smiled politely, and told myself I could handle it. But deep down, I already knew this wasn't going to end well. Ethan had no qualifications, no experience, and no respect for the work we did. On his second day, he leaned against my desk with his perfect smile and said, "So, Sarah, you'll basically be my assistant, right? Like making sure I don't get bored." I wanted to scream, but instead, I calmly explained his actual responsibilities. He laughed like I was joking and then walked away, leaving me seething. In meetings, his arrogance only grew. Whenever I presented an idea, he interrupted with something half-baked, as if talking louder would make him smarter. And the worst part, management let him. They nodded, humored him, and then looked at me to clean up the mess afterward. I started to feel invisible in a room where I had once earned respect. It didn't stop there. Ethan had this habit of making small, cutting remarks when no one else was listening. "You should smile more, Sarah," he'd whisper after a presentation. "You'd come across as less uptight." Or he'd sigh loudly when I corrected him, rolling his eyes like I was the one wasting his time. At first, I tried to brush it off, but the constant belittling started to eat at me, little by little, until I dreaded even walking into the office. What pushed me closest to my breaking point, though, was how quickly he started stealing credit. One evening, I stayed late polishing a pitch for a client I'd been chasing for months. Ethan left early, saying he had better things to do. The next morning, during the meeting, he presented my ideas word for word, as if they were his own. The room clapped. The client nodded. And I sat there, silent, watching him take a bow while my heart burned with rage. After that, it became a pattern. If something succeeded, Ethan made sure everyone thought it was his brilliance. If something failed, suddenly my name was attached to it. My co-workers, the same ones who used to trust me, started looking at me differently, like I was losing my edge. They didn't know the truth, and I had no way of proving it without sounding bitter or jealous. I went home every night exhausted, my head pounding with questions. Why was I even here if all my hard work could be erased so easily? How was I supposed to compete with a last name that carried more weight than my years of sacrifice? But as much as I hated him, I refused to let him crush me. Ethan might have walked into this company with power, but I knew something he didn't. Real success isn't inherited, it's earned. And sooner or later, I promised myself, I would find a way to make him see the difference. The campaign was the biggest project our department had taken on in years. It was the kind of opportunity that could put my name on the map, the kind of win that could finally prove to everyone that I wasn't just another employee. I was the backbone of the company. I poured everything into it. For weeks, I worked late into the night, my apartment lights glowing long after the city outside had gone quiet. I gave up weekends, ignored texts from friends, and lived off takeout cartons and cold coffee. Every detail mattered, and I wasn't going to let anything slip through the cracks. The morning of the pitch, I walked into the office with a mixture of nerves and pride. I had rehearsed my presentation until I could deliver it in my sleep. My files were organized, my slides perfect. For once, I felt like all my sacrifices were about to pay off. But when I reached the door to my office, my heart stopped. The nameplate was gone. The door was wide open, and inside the room was stripped bare. My desk, my computer, the files I had arranged with such care. Everything was gone. In their place was nothing but empty space, like I had never existed there at all. Panic surged through me. I rushed down the hall, scanning for my things, until I found them crammed into a tiny cubicle in the far corner of the floor. My chair was missing a wheel, my computer was barely plugged in, and my files were stacked haphazardly like someone had tossed them there without a second thought. I barely had time to process before I stormed into HR, demanding answers. The woman behind the desk avoided my eyes as she said, "The CEO requested it. Ethan will be taking your office." Just like that. No explanation. No apology. Just a simple statement, as if my hard work, my years in that company meant nothing at all. I walked back through the hall, my face burning, my chest tight. Coworkers glanced up from their desks but quickly looked away, pretending to be busy. No one said a word, but I could feel their pity. It was like being stripped in front of everyone, forced to stand there with my humiliation on display. And then Ethan appeared. He leaned casually against the doorframe of what used to be my office, now his, and smirked at me like it was the funniest thing in the world. "Nothing personal, Sarah," he said, his voice dripping with smugness. "Just business." The words hit me harder than a slap. Just business? Was that what he called stealing months of my effort, erasing years of dedication, and shoving me into a cubicle like I was disposable? I wanted to scream, to tell him he had no right, but my voice caught in my throat. All I could do was stare at him while he lounged in my chair, spinning slowly as if he'd earned the right to be there. I went back to the cubicle, sat down on the broken chair, and felt the weight of it all crash over me. My hands shook as I tried to pull up my files, but the screen flickered, refusing to load. The presentation I had worked on for weeks felt suddenly meaningless. I was supposed to walk into that pitch as a leader, someone who belonged at the head of the table. Now, I would be walking in as the woman shoved into the corner, the one who wasn't important enough to fight for. That morning, something inside me cracked. It wasn't just about the office. It was about dignity, about respect, about every hour of my life I had given to this place, only to be reminded that I could be replaced in an instant. Ethan thought he had won, but as I sat in that cubicle swallowing my humiliation, a new thought began to take root. He might have stolen my office, but he hadn't stolen my mind. And one day soon, I would make him regret underestimating me. I sat in my car in the company parking lot long after everyone else had left, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My chest heaved with silent sobs, the kind you choke back because you don't want anyone to hear, even though there's no one around. The humiliation of that morning replayed in my head like a cruel movie I couldn't turn off. My office stripped away, coworkers avoiding my eyes, Ethan smirking like he'd won some game I didn't even know I was playing. For years, I had sacrificed everything for this job. Late nights, missed birthdays, holidays spent alone in front of glowing screens instead of with family. And for what? To be shoved into a corner and treated like I was disposable. My heart screamed at me to quit, to hand in my badge, and walk away with whatever dignity I had left. The thought of never seeing Ethan's smug face again was tempting, almost liberating. But then another voice inside me cut through the tears. If I quit now, wasn't that exactly what he wanted? Wasn't that handing him victory on a silver platter? All the years I had poured into climbing this ladder would vanish, and Ethan, the spoiled son who had never earned a single thing in his life, would walk away believing he'd beaten me. That thought twisted in my gut, fueling a different kind of fire. I couldn't let him win. Not like this. By the time I finally drove home, the tears had dried, replaced with a dull ache behind my eyes. I walked into my apartment and collapsed on the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling until my phone buzzed. It was Maya, my best friend since college. She knew me well enough to hear the exhaustion in my silence, and before I could protest, she was knocking on my door with takeout and that determined look she always carried when she decided I needed saving from myself. I spilled everything to her, the humiliation, the anger, the temptation to quit. She listened without interrupting, her face soft but her eyes sharp. When I finally ran out of words, she leaned forward and said, "Sarah, don't you dare let that spoiled rich kid ruin what you've built. You've got brains, and he doesn't. That's your weapon. Use it." Her words struck something deep inside me. I had been so focused on the unfairness, on the pain, that I forgot the one thing I still had, my mind. Ethan could steal my office, my credit, even my seat at the table, but he couldn't steal what I knew, what I had worked so hard to master. That was mine. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt a spark of something different, something sharper than anger, steadier than grief. Revenge. Not the loud, dramatic kind that explodes in a single moment, but the quiet, calculated kind that grows in the shadows until it's ready to strike. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to storm into the CEO's office and demand justice. No, I would bide my time, watch closely, and wait for the perfect moment. As Maya hugged me goodbye that night, she whispered, "Don't fight him where he's strong. Make him fall where he's weak." I held on to those words long after she left. For the first time in weeks, I went to bed not with tears, but with a plan beginning to form. Ethan thought he had broken me. What he didn't know was that he had just lit the fire that would eventually consume him. The days that followed were some of the hardest to get through. Every time I walked past Ethan sitting smugly in the office that used to be mine, a wave of anger threatened to spill over. But instead of letting it consume me, I forced myself to watch, to listen, to notice. And soon I realized something important. Ethan wasn't just arrogant, he was careless. At first it showed in small ways. He'd send reports riddled with typos, numbers that didn't add up, deadlines missed without so much as an apology. He would shrug when clients asked questions he didn't know the answers to, then redirect the conversation as if charm alone could save him. Where I had spent years learning the systems and protocols of the company, Ethan treated them like optional suggestions. It became clear he wasn't interested in learning the business at all. He was only interested in impressing his father. Every move he made was calculated not for the good of the company, but for how it might make him look in Richard's eyes. He skipped legal reviews, brushed aside compliance checks, and fast-tracked proposals just so he could brag about his decisiveness. And because of who he was, people let him. But I didn't. Quietly, I began keeping a record. I started small, screenshots of emails, copies of reports he had botched, notes about meetings where he dismissed important concerns. I didn't tell anyone, not even Maya. Every night, I backed it up onto a private drive, labeling the files with dates and details. It wasn't revenge yet, it was insurance. Because something told me that Ethan's recklessness wasn't just going to embarrass him one day. It was going to cost the company dearly. Then came the night everything changed. I was working late, long after most of the office had gone home. The halls were dark and silent, the kind of stillness that made every sound echo. My cubicle light was the only one still on, my computer humming softly as I wrapped up revisions for the campaign. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Ethan's office door slightly ajar. He had left in a hurry earlier, and something compelled me to glance inside. I wasn't snooping, at least not at first. I just wanted to see if he had left anything I needed to clean up before the morning. But then I saw his computer screen still glowing. He hadn't logged out. Curiosity tugged at me. I knew it was risky, but I also knew Ethan. He was careless, sloppy, and sometimes the truth hides in the places people forget to lock. I stepped inside, my heart pounding, and skimmed the open emails on his screen. Most were the usual nonsense, half-baked replies, careless instructions. But then one subject line caught my eye. Final approval, contract numbers adjusted. I clicked it before I could talk myself out of it. The email was addressed to a client and CC'd to Richard. My eyes widened as I read. Ethan had approved a contract by inflating projections, changing the numbers to make the deal look more profitable than it really was. It wasn't just a mistake. It was fraud, and anyone with sense could see it. If that contract went forward, the company could be facing lawsuits, financial losses, even criminal investigations. I leaned back, my hands trembling as the weight of it sank in. Ethan wasn't just incompetent, he was dangerous. And now, for the first time, I had proof. I took a screenshot, saved the email, and quietly closed his computer. Walking back to my cubicle, I felt a strange calm wash over me. The seed of revenge that Maya had planted in me was no longer just an idea. I had found the crack in Ethan's armor. And if I played my cards right, it could be the very thing that brought him down. I spent the next week walking a tightrope between fury and focus. Every time I saw Ethan strut through the halls, grinning like he owned the world, I had to remind myself not to let my emotions take over. This wasn't about screaming in his face or throwing accusations that could be brushed aside as jealousy. If I was going to take him down, it had to be with precision, with proof so solid that no one could ignore it. Each night, after finishing my regular work, I stayed late piecing everything together. I organized every sloppy report he had filed, every reckless email he had sent, every discrepancy that revealed just how careless he was. The file grew thicker and thicker, dates neatly logged, emails printed and highlighted, meeting notes typed out with timestamps. What had started as a small insurance folder was becoming something far more dangerous, a case against him. I wasn't doing this lightly. More than once, I sat staring at the growing pile of evidence and asked myself if I was going too far. Ethan was arrogant, spoiled, and unqualified, yes, but did he deserve to have his career destroyed? Then I thought of that fraudulent contract he had approved. If it went through, it wouldn't just embarrass him. It could ruin the company's reputation, put jobs at risk, and drag innocent people into the fallout. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just personal anymore. It was about protecting everything I, and so many others, had worked to build. When the file was finally complete, I opened a blank email. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, my heart racing as I imagined what I was about to do. The recipients weren't just HR or my department manager this time. I typed in the addresses of the board of directors, the people who had real power. And then HR, because if this went further, they had to be in the loop. I took my time writing. The tone had to be professional, calm, impossible to twist into something emotional or vindictive. I explained that I had serious concerns about certain actions taken by Ethan, outlined how his mistakes could harm the company, and attached the file of evidence I had compiled. Every word mattered. I wasn't accusing him out of anger. I was documenting facts, letting the truth speak for itself. When I finished, I sat back and read the email over and over. It was strong, clear, and damning. If anyone in power cared about integrity, they would have no choice but to act. And yet, my finger hovered over the send button like it weighed 1,000 pounds. What if it backfired? What if the board dismissed me as bitter or jealous, siding with the CEO and his son instead of an employee like me? I could be labeled a troublemaker, blacklisted from future opportunities, maybe even fired. The thought made my stomach twist. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glow of the computer screen in the darkened office. Outside the window, the city lights blinked against the night sky, a reminder of how small I was in the grand scheme of things. Was I really ready to risk everything I had left? I closed my eyes and pictured Ethan sitting in my old office, spinning in my chair with that smug smirk. I remembered his words. Nothing personal, just business. And suddenly, my hesitation turned to steel. Maybe this was business too. But it was also justice. With a deep breath, I clicked Save Draft and shut down my computer. Not tonight, I told myself. Tomorrow, maybe. For now, I needed to be sure. Because once I sent that email, there would be no going back. The moment my finger pressed the send button, I felt like I had just jumped off a cliff. The email was gone, sailing into the inboxes of the board of directors and HR. There was no undoing it, no way to call it back. For a few seconds, I sat frozen at my desk, staring at the screen as though something would happen immediately. A reply, an alert, some kind of acknowledgement. But nothing came. Just silence. The office felt heavier that night. The hum of the overhead lights, the distant sound of a janitor's cart squeaking down the hallway. It all pressed against me like the world itself was holding its breath. I packed my things slowly, every step echoing in my mind. You did it. Now you wait. The next morning, I walked into work half expecting security to be waiting at the front desk with a box for my things. But there was nothing. Ethan was already strutting down the corridor, laughing with two junior analysts, the perfect picture of untouchable confidence. When he saw me, his smirk widened, and he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Oh, look who's still hanging around. Guess some people just don't know when to quit." I bit my tongue and kept walking. He had no idea what I'd done. Or worse, maybe he did, and the board had dismissed it without even bothering to speak to me. Days went by, each one stretching my nerves thinner. I checked my email obsessively, refreshing my inbox every few minutes. Nothing. No acknowledgement, no polite "we'll look into this." Not even an automatic response. I started to think I'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe I hadn't been careful enough. Maybe the board was so loyal to the CEO that they'd ignored me completely. Meanwhile, Ethan was thriving, or at least pretending to. He swaggered into meetings late, cut off senior managers mid-sentence, and bragged about his vision for the company, as if he'd built it himself. He even made a point of passing by my cubicle, tapping the edge of my desk and saying things like, "Don't worry, Sarah, some people are just better suited for background work." His voice dripped with mock sympathy, the kind that burned hotter than outright cruelty. At night, I replayed everything in my head. What if they forwarded my email to Ethan's father? What if HR flagged me as disloyal? The file of evidence sat on my desktop like a ticking time bomb, a reminder that I had lit a fuse I couldn't extinguish. By the fourth day, I was on edge. I barely slept, and when I did, I dreamt of being marched out of the building while Ethan laughed behind me. At lunch, I sat alone, stabbing at my salad, wondering if silence was their way of preparing to fire me quietly. Then, on the fifth morning, my phone buzzed with a message from the executive assistant to the board. It was short, almost clinical. "Sarah, please report to the 19th floor boardroom at 2 p.m. Urgent." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled as I read it again, the words blurring on the screen. Urgent. Not optional. Not a casual check-in. Something was happening. At 1:55, I rode the elevator up, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out the soft music playing overhead. The doors opened to the polished silence of the executive floor. The receptionist looked up, gave me a brief nod, and gestured toward the double doors of the boardroom. I stepped inside. Every seat around the massive oak table was filled. Directors in dark suits, HR at the far end, and the CEO himself at the head, his expression unreadable. The air felt charged, like a storm about to break. As the doors closed behind me, I realized this was it. My email hadn't vanished into the void after all. It had landed. And now, I was about to find out what kind of explosion it had set off. When I stepped into the boardroom, the air was so heavy I could almost taste it. The long mahogany table stretched out before me, lined with directors in pressed suits, their expressions grave. At the head sat Richard, our CEO, his jaw clenched tight. Beside him, slouched in his chair with none of his usual swagger, was Ethan. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked rattled. His face was pale, his hands twitching as though he wanted to drum his fingers but knew better than to show such nerves in this setting. "Sarah," the chairwoman of the board said evenly, "thank you for joining us. Please take a seat." My legs felt wooden as I crossed the room and sat at the far end, directly across from Ethan. He didn't meet my eyes. The chairwoman cleared her throat and turned her gaze toward him. "Ethan, we've reviewed the materials submitted. The evidence is concerning, to say the least. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and muttered, "It's being blown out of proportion. Everyone pads numbers. It's how business works." A murmur of disapproval rippled through the board. One of the directors, a sharp-eyed woman from legal, shot forward in her seat. "Padding numbers? Ethan, the contract you approved could have exposed us to millions in liability. Do you understand that falsifying figures is grounds for litigation? This isn't college coursework you can bluff your way through. This is federal law." Richard raised a hand, his voice smooth but tense. "Let's not overreact. My son is still learning the ropes. Yes, mistakes were made, but nothing that can't be corrected internally. There's no need to tarnish his future over this." The chairwoman's eyes hardened. "With all due respect, Richard, this isn't about tarnishing anyone's future. This is about protecting the company. Our clients trust us with their businesses. Our investors trust us with their money. If this had slipped through unnoticed, the consequences could have been catastrophic. I sat still, my palms flat on the table, every muscle in my body taut. This was what I had hoped for but never fully believed I'd see: Ethan being held accountable. One of the senior board members turned directly to me. "Sarah, you were the one instructed to mentor Ethan, correct?" "Yes," I said quietly. I tried to guide him, but he consistently ignored protocol. When I realized he had signed off on that contract without proper review, I documented everything. I thought the board should know before the damage became irreversible. The chairwoman gave a small nod. "You did the right thing." Ethan's composure cracked. His face flushed red as he shot up in his chair. "She's lying. She's jealous because I got promoted over her. This is just some pathetic vendetta." "Sit down, Ethan," Richard hissed under his breath, but the boardroom was already buzzing with disapproval. The legal director slammed a folder shut. "Enough. The evidence speaks for itself. This isn't jealousy, this is negligence. Worse, it's arrogance. And it cannot continue." For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. His usual cocky smirk was gone, replaced with desperation. He looked at his father, eyes pleading. "Dad, do something. Tell them." But Richard's face had darkened. He opened his mouth, then shut it again, realizing his authority was crumbling in front of his peers. The board had spoken, and even he couldn't shield his son from this storm. The chairwoman's voice was final, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Effective immediately, Ethan is relieved of all responsibilities within this company. Security will escort him out. Richard, we will discuss next steps for leadership after this meeting. For now, protecting this firm comes first." Silence hung in the air. Ethan's chest heaved, his lips parting as though he wanted to protest again, but no words came. When two security officers appeared at the door, he went limp, his fight draining away. They guided him out, his shoulders hunched, his once proud stride reduced to a shuffle. I sat frozen, watching the spectacle. The same man who had stolen my office, smirked in my face, mocked my work, was now being let out like a schoolboy caught cheating on an exam. His arrogance had crumbled piece by piece, until there was nothing left but shame. When the doors closed behind him, the board turned back to business, their voices low but firm. I barely heard them. My heart pounded in my ears, not with fear this time, but with something sharper: vindication. For the first time in months, I felt like justice had walked into the room with me. And for the first time, Ethan was the one left powerless. When the board dismissed me from the room, my legs were trembling, but I held my head high. I had just witnessed something I never thought possible. Ethan stripped of his arrogance, his father silenced, and the truth laid bare for everyone to see. I expected to slip back to my cubicle quietly, but instead, the chairwoman stopped me at the door. "Sarah," she said, her tone softer now, "thank you for your diligence. Most people would have stayed quiet, but you protected this company. We owe you a debt of gratitude." Her words stunned me. I managed a small nod, muttered something like, "Just doing my job," and hurried out before the heat rising in my cheeks betrayed me. By the end of the week, HR called me in for a private meeting. My heart thumped with nerves. I worried maybe they were letting me go despite everything. Instead, the HR director smiled across the desk. "The board has recommended you for a promotion. Senior project manager. Effective immediately." For a moment, I couldn't even respond. The weight of months of humiliation, of biting my tongue and fighting to be seen, lifted all at once. When I finally found my voice, I whispered, "Thank you," and meant it with every fiber of my being. Word spread fast. Co-workers who had once avoided my eyes in the hallway now greeted me warmly. People started stopping by my desk, offering congratulations, asking for my advice. The same office floor where I had felt invisible was now buzzing with a respect I had long craved. Even Richard, the man who had defended his son with iron walls of authority, couldn't meet my gaze anymore. He walked the hallways briskly, his shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the floor whenever we crossed paths. Once he had loomed over everyone like a mountain. Now he was just a shadow of a man, carrying the weight of his son's disgrace. Ethan was gone, but his ghost lingered in the whispers people shared in the break room. "Can you believe it?" someone said one afternoon pouring coffee. "All that privilege, and he blew it in less than 6 months." Another chimed in. "Sarah was the one who saw it coming. She saved us." They didn't notice I was standing nearby, but hearing those words made something in me settle. Finally, the truth was recognized, not hidden. At home, Maya was waiting with open arms. She had been my rock through the storm, the voice reminding me not to quit when every fiber of my being wanted to walk away. I told her everything, the boardroom, the promotion, the sudden shift in how people treated me. She listened, her smile growing wider with each detail. Finally, she leaned back on the couch, crossed her arms, and said, "You didn't just survive, Sarah. You showed them who actually runs that place. They thought you were small. Turns out, you were the one carrying the whole company on your back." Her words hit deep. I realized she was right. My worth had never depended on an office or a title. It was in the work I had poured myself into, the integrity I had refused to compromise, and the courage it had taken to speak the truth when silence would have been easier. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying everything. The long nights of work, the humiliation of being shoved into a cubicle, Ethan's smug grin as he told me it was just business. And now, his smirk replaced with shame, his father's pride crumbled, and my name finally spoken with respect. I didn't feel triumphant in a loud, gloating way. It was quieter than that, steadier. It was the satisfaction of knowing I had stood my ground, weathered the storm, and come out stronger on the other side. For once, I didn't dread the morning. I couldn't wait to walk back into that office, not to prove myself anymore, but simply to take my rightful place. I sat alone in my office one evening, the sun dipping low over the Chicago skyline, its light spilling across the desk that had once been stolen from me. The silence of the room wasn't empty. It was full, almost heavy, with everything that had happened in the last few months. I leaned back in the chair, the same chair Ethan had claimed as his own, and finally allowed myself to breathe without fear of what tomorrow might bring. I kept thinking about the path that had led me here. There had been no shouting matches, no scenes of me begging anyone for fairness, no desperate pleas to be treated as an equal. That wasn't how I won. I won by being sharper, by watching closely when others weren't paying attention, by trusting that facts and persistence could be stronger than power and privilege. It hadn't been easy, and it had cost me more nights of sleep than I could count. But in the end, patience had been my greatest weapon. Ethan had walked into this place believing he could take whatever he wanted because of his last name. He strutted around like the world owed him success, and for a while, it almost seemed like he was right. For a while, I thought people like me, people who gave everything and still got shoved aside, were destined to stay invisible. But the truth was different. He wasn't untouchable. He was careless. And carelessness, when someone like me is watching, leaves cracks big enough to bring down an empire. Now I was sitting in his old office, but the difference was clear. He had treated it like a prize, a symbol of power. I treated it like responsibility. Every file on my desk, every email in my inbox, every junior employee who nervously knocked on my door. Those were reminders that my job wasn't just about me anymore. It was about keeping this company steady, about making sure no one else ever had to watch incompetence climb the ladder while their hard work was ignored. Walking through the hallways felt different too. Coworkers looked at me with something more than polite acknowledgement. They looked at me with respect. The same people who once turned away when I was humiliated now sought me out, eager to share ideas, to collaborate, to know that their work would be seen. I hadn't just claimed back an office. I'd claimed back dignity, not just for myself, but for everyone who believed merit should matter. Maya's words echoed in my mind more than ever. "You've got brains. Don't let a spoiled rich kid ruin what you built." She had been right. I hadn't just protected what I built. I had expanded it. I proved to myself that I didn't need shortcuts, favors, or family connections to earn my place. All I needed was to trust that the truth, when shown in the right light, could outshine even the brightest mask of arrogance. As I packed up for the night, I paused with my hand on the doorframe and looked back once more. The office felt like mine now. Not because a plaque on the door said so, but because I had fought for it, earned it, and claimed it with integrity. A small smile tugged at my lips as I whispered to myself. He stole my office, but with one email, I got it back, and everything he thought he deserved. The words settled into the quiet room like a promise. Full circle. The story that had begun with humiliation ended with justice. And for the first time in years, I didn't just feel like I had survived. I felt like I had finally won. What about Ethan? Was losing everything the price he deserved to pay, or do you think he could have changed if given another chance? Share your thoughts down below. I'd really love to hear them. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you're always the first to catch the next one.